You're playing a game you don't even realize you're in. And worse, you're already losing. This isn't just any game, it's life. But not the kind of life that unfolds gracefully across crystal chessboards, shared over wine and clever conversation. No, your game is unfolding quietly, in the shadows, with pieces you barely recognize, and moves, driven not by wisdom, but by fear. And here's the kicker. You don't even know who you are in this game. Are you the pawn, the queen, the bystander, the king? You've been so caught up trying to be impressive, smart, charming, unstoppable, that you've forgotten the one thing that actually matters. Survival, purpose, intention. You're chasing checkmate like it's a sprint, making frantic moves with no direction, as if momentum is more important than meaning. But let me tell you something. The king, the one piece that truly matters, barely moves. He doesn't rush. He doesn't race across the board. He holds his ground, not because he's fast or flashy, but because without him, the game ends. That's you. You're the king. Not because of your hustle, not because of your cleverness, because your presence is essential. But you've given your power away, handed it to people, roles, titles that vanish with time. You've convinced yourself that being in control means having answers to everything, being everything, everywhere, all at once. But that's not mastery. That's chaos. True control starts in stillness. It starts with knowing what not to respond to, what not to chase. Not everything that sparkles on the board is worth your energy. Not every move deserves your attention. You've been sold a lie. That strength is loud, aggressive, always in motion. But real strength is quiet. It's rooted. It knows what matters and lets the rest pass by. Let me ask you, how strong can you really be if you can't protect your own peace? How far do you think you'll go when you don't even know where you're going? The problem isn't that you haven't succeeded. The problem is you've never paused to ask, why am I even doing this? Because without a purpose to protect, distractions will devour you. Every shiny thing becomes a trap. Every compliment a leash. The best players don't start by watching their opponents. They start by understanding their king, his boundaries, his value, his position on the board. They know what's worth defending before a single move is made. Do you? And if your answer is your job, your reputation, the way people see you, you're missing the point. That's not substance. That's smoke. What actually matters, the stuff that makes you unshakable, is invisible. Your mental well-being, your emotional clarity, your personal code, your purpose. That's your fortress. That's your core. And if you let that crumble, no amount of external wins will hold the rest together. But you've neglected it. You've ignored the foundation and decorated the ruins. And then you wonder why peace feels so out of reach. It's because you've been trying to live from the outside in when it only ever works the other way around. You think success is about applause, about admiration. But the truth is, the crowd can cheer while you're dying inside. What good is a victorious queen if the king is shattered? You've been playing as if you're unbreakable, sprinting forward like a rook in straight lines, never hesitating. But you're not a rook. You're the king. And the king plays a slower game, one built on foresight, on restraint. He doesn't win by conquering. He wins by surviving, by protecting, by knowing when to hold still. Every time you betray your gut to fit in, it's like stepping into a trap you can't even see. Every time you trade your truth for approval, you're leaving your soul exposed. And every time you pretend you're fine, instead of facing what hurts, you lose something sacred. And you're still surprised why peace keeps slipping through your fingers? It's because you haven't built a safe space inside yourself. You've fortified the outside, polished your persona, played the part. But inside, it's chaos. And it always will be until you realize The game was never about moving others. It was always about understanding what's worth sacrificing and what isn't. And that takes self-awareness. Because the person who knows themselves doesn't build a strategy that burns them out. They don't confuse noise with necessity. They know their worth. And because of that, they don't sell themselves short. Not for praise, not for power, not for anything. The saddest part? You've made these trades, big ones, costly ones, wearing a smile, trying to convince yourself it's just ambition, just being adaptable. But how long will you keep doing that? How long will you keep calling your anxiety drive? How long will you pretend you're thriving when all you've done is built a life that looks good and feels empty? This isn't about winning. This is about not losing the one thing that matters, yourself. It's about protecting what anchors you, even when everything else is on fire. Because once the king falls, the game doesn't keep going. It ends. And here's something no one wants to tell you. Your biggest enemy? It's not out there. It's not the people who doubted you. It's not your circumstances. It's the voice inside, the quiet one. The one whispering, "You're not ready. Don't try. Stay here. Stay safe." And you listen. Because it's familiar. Because you've heard it for so long, you think it's your own voice. But it's not. You're the one hearing it. And if you're hearing it, you can change it. Leadership, real leadership, doesn't begin when you start leading others. It begins the moment you learn to lead yourself. When you learn to hush the inner critic, to take action even when your hands are shaking. Because chaos, it never really goes away. What changes is your capacity to navigate through it, and that capacity is built in silence, in stillness, in reflection. The world celebrates victory, but what it truly respects, what inspires, is someone who holds on to themselves when it would be easier to let go. Because success without inner peace is just noise, an empty shout echoing in a hollow chamber, a title with no soul behind it. So here's the real question. Are you trying to win, or are you trying to survive without surrendering who you are? Because only one of those paths leads to real freedom. This isn't about being invincible. It's about being wise. Knowing where your weak spots are, and guarding them, not with arrogance, but with awareness, with values, with conviction. Because when you're clear on what's worth protecting, you stop selling yourself at the first sign of pressure. And ironically, the clearer you become, the less you need to prove. The stronger your core, the less outside noise gets in. You stop reacting, you start choosing. You don't panic over every loss. You don't move for show. You move when it matters. That's real power. It's not loud. It's not showy. It's the calm you carry. The steadiness people can't quite explain. The quiet confidence that unnerves those still addicted to noise. It's the gaze that says, "I know who I am. I know where I stand. And I won't move just to be liked." So let me ask you, when was the last time you sat with yourself and asked, what is it I truly need to protect? Because if you can't answer that, you're not playing. You're just moving. And those who just move, they lose. The truth is, you can't win a game you don't understand, and you'll never understand it if you don't first understand yourself. The players who get manipulated, who move blindly, who sacrifice what matters most for what matters least. They all have one thing in common. They're lost within. They never took the time to sit still and define what their life is actually about. Let me say it as clearly as possible. If you don't know what you're defending, everything becomes a distraction. Every demand feels urgent. Every offer feels tempting. Every loss feels fatal. You give in too quickly. You say yes too often. You bend when you should have stood still. And the most tragic part? You're not even being pushed by force. You're being pulled by fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of missing out. Fear of being invisible. And so you move. Constantly. Reactively. Without strategy. Without soul. That's not playing. That's surviving on autopilot. Look around you. So many people are sprinting through life with no idea where they're going. Consuming endlessly. Comparing constantly. Faking joy. Faking strength. Trying to outrun emptiness with busyness. And they look confident. But they're crumbling. Why? Because they've traded clarity for approval. They've given up their center for the crowd. And the crowd is never satisfied. Never loyal. You keep thinking your next win will quiet the noise. Your next promotion. Your next relationship. Your next goal. But it doesn't. It never does. Because the emptiness you're running from isn't out there, it's inside. And the only way to silence it isn't by doing more, achieving more, being more. It's by becoming still enough to listen. Self-knowledge isn't weakness. It's not indulgent. It's not soft. It's dangerous in the best possible way. Because when you finally understand what you won't compromise, when you know your values so well that no applause can distract you and no rejection can shake you, you become untouchable to a world that thrives on insecurity. You stop being predictable. You stop being easy to manipulate. You stop being controlled by validation. Because you don't need it anymore. You've already given yourself the one thing no one else can: your own approval. That's when everything changes. You're no longer controlled by external wins or losses. You don't panic when things fall apart. You don't shrink when people disapprove. You stand tall, not because you're perfect, but because you're anchored, rooted, alive. This isn't about ego. This isn't about thinking you're better than anyone. It's about knowing exactly where you stand, what you value, what you're willing to lose, and what you're never going to trade away. No matter how shiny the offer. That's clarity. And clarity is a weapon. Clarity doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to prove itself. It walks into a room and shifts the atmosphere. Not with noise, but with presence. Because in a world full of people who don't know what they want, someone who does is a threat. Someone who moves with intention is intimidating. Not because they're aggressive, but because they don't play the game everyone else does. They don't chase. They choose. They don't beg. They build. They don't react. They respond. With precision. With care. With awareness. And it all starts by asking the questions most people avoid. What am I willing to protect, no matter what? What part of me must remain untouched, no matter the reward, no matter the pressure? Because if you don't define that, someone else will define it for you. And here's the raw truth. If you don't choose your life, the world will hand you a version of it you never asked for. It'll fill your time with distractions, fill your mind with noise, fill your heart with doubts, and you'll call that life. But it won't be yours. It'll be a reflection of expectations, a performance, a prison with a view. And that's how most people live. Busy, admired, successful, and lost. But you don't have to. You can choose something else. You can take the wheel back. You can stop moving for movement's sake. You can start playing with purpose. And when you do, the board stops feeling like a trap. It becomes a mirror, a reflection of your choices, your boundaries, your truth. But don't think it's easy. It's not. Because to live like this, to live awake, you have to be willing to lose what everyone else is chasing. You have to let go of the need to impress, to outperform, to prove. You have to give up the cheap highs of validation for the quiet power of alignment. And that takes courage. Courage to say no. Courage to stay when others rush. Courage to protect what matters, even when it's invisible, even when it's unpopular. Because sometimes, the most strategic move is to stay still. Sometimes, the most powerful act is silence. And sometimes, the greatest victory is not losing yourself in the chaos. This is why inner balance is so important, not just as an idea, but as a way of life. Because without it, you'll keep swinging between extremes, burnout and guilt, overworking and avoiding, pleasing and resenting. And the cycle will never end until you pause and rebuild. So start here. Start now. Not with a big decision, not with a grand gesture, but with a small, honest step. Ask yourself, what am I ignoring? What am I neglecting? What have I sacrificed that I never should have put on the table? And when you have your answer, protect it. Fiercely. Because this world doesn't reward people for knowing who they are. It rewards people for fitting in, for being predictable, for playing by rules they didn't write. But you, if you're still listening, you're not meant to play small. You're not meant to be a pawn, shuffled around by forces you don't control. You are the king, and kings don't chase. They defend. Kings don't panic. They plan. Kings don't crumble. They lead. So lead, not the world, not your followers. Start with your own mind, your own spirit, your own life. Lead yourself through the chaos, through the self-doubt, through the fear. And when you do, when you finally understand the power of moving with intention, everything changes. You become dangerous, not to others, but to the systems that want to keep you blind. You stop settling. You stop saying yes when your soul is screaming no. You stop mistaking noise for progress. And suddenly, your steps become sacred. Your moves become meaningful. Your presence becomes a statement. Because you're no longer living to survive. You're living to protect, to honor, to align. That's what real freedom feels like. It's not a loud rebellion. It's not a dramatic overhaul. It's quiet, grounded, liberating. It's the moment you stop asking for permission. The moment you stop trying to be more and realize you already are. It's the moment you look in the mirror and see someone you actually respect. And that's priceless. So I'll ask you again, are you just moving or are you playing? Because if you're playing, then it's time to take responsibility for your board. It's time to step into the position you've been avoiding, to stop outsourcing your worth, to stop waiting for someone else to tell you you're enough. You're the king. You always have been. But you've been moving like a pawn. That ends now. From this moment forward, every step you take must come from clarity. Every decision must honor what you've decided is non-negotiable. Every win must feel true, and every loss must leave your center untouched. That's how you build a life worth living. Not one full of empty trophies, but one that feels like home. Not one that wins the crowd, but one that saves your soul. And the world may never understand you. It may never applaud you for this, but that's fine, because you won't need it. You'll have something better. Peace, integrity, alignment, power. The kind of power that isn't granted. It's claimed, not with noise, but with clarity. Not with control, but with truth. So if this message hits something deep, if you've been silently nodding, feeling that fire stir, don't let it fade. Use it. Let this be your call to begin. Not with grand moves, but with grounded ones. And as you do, as you return to your role, remember this. You don't need to rush. You don't need to be seen. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be present. Intentional. Rooted in who you are and what you'll never betray. Because that, more than anything, is how kings are made. Now go. Not to play louder, but to play real. And never forget, the king doesn't give up. Say it out loud. Write it down. My king doesn't give up. That's your declaration. That's your reminder. And that's how the real game begins. We'll see each other again, not in the noise, but in the silence between moves. The silence where clarity lives, where power grows, where the game is yours.